Hello everyone, this is Cody speaking, and today we will be going through phylum Platyhelminthes. So let's get started. So to begin, Platyhelminthes comes from the Greek words platus helminths, which means literally flat worm. So that's where we get the name that we all know today. So whenever we look at their taxonomy, we can see that they are after the Cnidarians. So this means that they have a variety of key features that distinguish them. Firstly, we notice that they are triploblastic. So this means that we see the presence of an endoderm and an ectoderm, the inner and outer layers, and then we also see that they have a mesoderm. Now this is very important because the mesoderm is the third tissue layer that makes them triploblastic, and it also allows for the development of a coelom. However, we see that in Platyhelminthes, we don't actually see the development of a coelom because they are acoelomates. We also see the presence of bilateral symmetry, and this allows improved mobility. So whenever we look at the radial symmetry that we have, say, in a starfish, we see that these types of animals can't actually move around effectively, whereas bilateral symmetry, which is actually a part that's paired with cephalization, allows for the movement and for the ability to have all of the organs in one central head region. So here we're going to look at a video that demonstrates how a flatworm moves. So as we can see here, the flatworm has this head area over here, and this is where the entire body is heading. So this allows for the flatworm to have one central area where all of the reception or the nerves like what is being received is in this central area. We can also see the presence of the bilateral symmetry because we have this split down the middle here. So whenever we look at general characteristics, we can see that they can be both free-living or parasitic depending on the class. So this means that they can have a variety of impacts on humans. The tegument is an outer cellular structure that covers their body. So they have this one layer that's called the tegument, and this secretes a mucus that helps protect them. They also have flame cells, and these are very important because it regulates the water levels and removes waste by negative pressure. So this is important because if we think about a marine environment, it's very important for for Platyhelminthes to be able to get rid of the extra salt that's in the water. Or whenever we're looking at a freshwater environment, it's very important that the animal can maintain their mineral resources without or by getting rid of the excess water. So that's where the flame cell comes in handy. Whenever we look at cephalization, we see that these are the first animals with ocelli, which are the little eye bits that we see that are so cute on the Platyhelminthes. We also see the presence of a statocyst, so this is important because it allows for the animal to balance. And finally, we see a rheoreceptor, which is basically a receptor that allows the animal to sense the water currents. None of the following systems are in Platyhelminthes, and these are the respiratory system because they just use gas exchange via the skin. A circulatory system is also not present, and we also don't see a skeletal system. It's worth noting that these are acoelomates, and this means that they have an incomplete gut that's located kind of like if you were to see the entire animal, it would be like in the middle area. And so an incomplete gut is very important because evolutionally, that means that as far as whenever we're looking at the evolutionary tree, having a complete gut allows the animal to actually completely process one meal and also eat another meal. However, in this case, because the mouth and the anus are effectively the same spot, Platyhelminthes can only eat one thing at a time, if that comes together. As far as so, whenever we see the entire digestive tract, that means that numerous different meals can enter and are being processed at the same time, compared to an incomplete gut, which only allows the presence of one. And finally, the mesoderm is filled by this parenchyma in within this specific organism. So there's three different classes within Platyhelminthes. So we see the class Turbellaria, which is the planarians. We see class Cestode, which is the tapeworms. And then finally we have class Trematoda, which are the flukes. So there are more than 34,000 species in this phylum, which is worth just adding in there. So whenever we look at the specific species, we see that there are three, or my bad, the specific classes of Platyhelminthes, we see that there are three different types, which is Turbolaria. So these are free-living flatworms, and they rely on the diffusion of gas across the thin body wall for respiration. We'll then look at their free movement and why this is so important for them. We also have the two parasitic classes, which are Trematoda and Cestoda. So whenever we're talking about locomotion, Turbellaria are free-moving and ventrally ciliated, which means that they have the cilia on the bottom, and so or on their ventral side. And so this is what allows them to move headfirst and practice this cephalization. So the presence of the cilia allows them to move along the floor. Finally, we see the presence of a dual head adhesive organ, and this can be the viscid gland, which is used for attachment to the substrate. So they're basically just attaching and then releasing with the releasing gland, which obviously is to release themselves. And so we see this attaching and releasing that they use. And this is very interesting if you look at videos where they're swimming along, they can swim along, and then they use that viscid gland to attach to the substrate or to the bottom of the ocean. Finally, the parasitic classes live within their host, so the presence of the ability to swim or something like that is not as important as it is for Turbellaria. When we look at reproduction, they both use multiple hosts. So whenever we look at Trematoda and Cestodes, which are the two parasitic types, they both use multiple hosts, which is very important. They either use one or multiple hosts to be able to use their reproductive cycle. So whenever we look at the Trematodes, it's very important because they have this process that's digenetic. And what this means is that they have one larval stage that is asexual. So this is whenever they're larvae and they are just reproducing as many as possible. And then whenever obviously they get into the second or third, or whenever they get into one of the hosts, they have this sexual stage where they are trying to reproduce and trying to further along the species by changing the genetic composition. Cestodes are different because they're monoecious, which means that they have both the male and female sexual parts within the single organism. So mono means the one organism can reproduce. It's not a dioecious, which needs the two different, it needs a mother and a father. So they reproduce via the production of proglottids, which are these sections that we can see at the bottom here. So obviously the sections become bigger and bigger. So obviously they have these suckers which are used to attach, and then that's how they end up feeding. But on the other end, we see this presence of proglottids, which are, as they get larger and larger, they split off, and that is what forms a new animal. Whenever we look at Turbellaria, we see that they are sexual, so that means that they are monoecious, but they avoid self-fertilization. So this means that even though they have both the male and the female sex organs, they're not going to just asexually reproduce. Instead, they're going to search and find a mate, and they're going to swim or crawl, or not crawl, but use their cilia for locomotion to find a mate. And then we see the presence of direct development. So that means that they don't have a larval stage, they're just born as a small little individual, and then that will directly grow to form an adult. There's no stages in other animals or anything of that sort. It's also worth noting here that the ovary and the testes and all of the reproductive organs are very close to the head region, which is something that I found very interesting, or something that's different to say what we would see in humans. And then finally, we see that they are asexual. So this means that or what I mean by that is that we see this transverse fission. And so I'd like to discuss this a bit more because this is really what fascinated me. This is what caught my attention whenever we're looking at Platyhelminthes. So we see that, say in a human, if someone was to lose an arm, we would see that this healing process is very slow because we have to close the wound and then clean the debris. However, flatworms use this powerful stem cells to regenerate up to their entire bodies. So let's have a look at this video here where they actually cut a flatworm into numerous different parts.
Seriously.
And so we can see this is almost like something out of a horror film where they're cutting this.
It doesn't even hurt.
And then we can see that over time they start to regenerate. And so even here you can see that they're fine. So obviously if this was to happen to a human, it would be an instant death.
You can
But we
see
can
under a
see that they
microscope
heal
that
up here like this
overnight
with their
its
wound,
wound
which is something
heals
that we could also
closed.
do. If we were to
Okay,
lose a
maybe
finger, we
we
would
could
be
do
able to
that, more
regenerate that
slowly, of
slowly
course.
by
But
potentially
then
covering it.
it starts to
However, as you
regenerate,
can see
growing
here,
new
after
tissue.
3 days,
It's that white part, called
and
the
then we get
elastin
further
layer.
on into the cycle, and they can actually reproduce.
In a week,
And so
see
this
those
means that you
tiny
could
red
technically just
spots?
take one like this,
They're
and then
new
you'll end up
eyes grown
with
from
four
scratch.
different
But
platyhelminthes.
the
Now,
planarian,
this is
can I
very
call it
important
that yet? It
because
still kind of looks like a
it
blob.
has a bunch of repercussions as far
By
as
day
if we
12,
could
it's
potentially
starting to
do
look
something
like a
like this in
proper
humans, it would
planarian.
be absolutely
It's got a
incredible.
head,
And
an
so,
entirely
obviously, the
new
ability
head,
to produce from one cell
and
or a
a
couple
new
different
tail.
cells an entire organism like this after 12
And
days
it's
is
doing what the
absolutely
regular
incredible. So, just a quick summary here. They're parasitic or free living. So, depending on their class, they are acoelomate, which means that they have the one entrance and the one exit, but they are triple blastic, which means they have the endoderm, the ectoderm, and the mesoderm. And then finally, we see this bilateral symmetry and cephalization because they have the majority of their sensory organs in the head. So, this is truly an amazing phylum because it allows us to see just it's just incredible to me that an organism can go from 5 or 10 cells and just form a completely new organism like this. And so that's what really got me interested in this phylum, and I hope you have enjoyed.